As an early childhood practitioner, we know that working with families can be one of the most challenging and rewarding parts of our job. So taking the extra time in a time after a crisis to connect with the families is really important. So think about some practical solutions. Families may be time poor. Parents may be struggling with the cost of sending their children to early childhood services. So have a really deep think about what it is that might be barriers to families connecting with you in your community. It could be aspects of infrastructure in the community that have been damaged. Think about their capacity to get to and from the service, to be able to meet the fees. Do they have access to the immunisation records that they need? So all of those practical barriers as well. When families have been enrolled in your service and don't come, have a think about how you might like to approach that in a sensitive way. How can you reach out? How can you connect with them? What other networks is there in your community to support families if they're not coming into the service at that time? Can you do a supported play group? Can you reach out to parents to offer parents to come in and have morning tea? We know that some families will actually have separation anxiety where the child's ready to come back into their education and care environments, but parents are feeling really anxious and it's difficult for them to say goodbye. So things like having a morning tea where the parents can stay, having a working bee so they can be working on something together for a morning in the playground, particularly if you've had any damage or loss. Myself in 2001 as a director at a mobile preschool experienced bushfires on the south coast, and one of the issues that we had coming back was the embers had fallen and burnt through the sandpit cover. So one of the rebuilding exercises that we did is that we had a barbecue and we invited some families to come in and we actually recovered the sandpit for the children. And that was a really healing process for us to go to. We're also really sensitive for the fact that some parents were really overwhelmed and were actually doing so much work on their property that wasn't something they were able to do. So it's really important to have opportunities there, but to be understanding when parents can't come into the centre and make that connection. There are many diverse challenges that families could be facing. We can't assume what a family is navigating because of where they live or what happened to them, because we know that response is individualised. But we do know in our services, in our networks, that families have lost homes. We know that parents have lost jobs. We know that children have lost pets. We know that communities have lost businesses. There's going to be ongoing social and economic impacts. We know that the children also are very concerned about the natural wildlife in their area. So we need to be really open-minded and really listen to what it is that's impacting on individual families, but be also in tune to what's happening at a community level. So you will understand your community best, and it's really important to stay connected and also to connect your children and families back to their community to have a sense of normalcy. So as a service, you might be thinking about your connections and collaborations with your local community. You might already have some really strong connections that you have had in place over a number of years and times. You may have links to local elders, you may have links to local community groups, you might have links to the library, the local schools. So try and brainstorm all of those strong connections you already have and think about how you might be able to reaffirm those, and think about prioritising what's important. You might like to participate in a simple exercise such as one of your service sponsoring one of the native animals in the area. So think about how we can empower children to feel helpful and to feel like they're actually contributing to their community. So that will provide them with a really strong sense of being able to move forward and being part of rebuilding.
And in other ways as well, we had families who'd come to us talking about their child's separation distress, and So we accessed the psychologist and he came to train us, and then we made time before our PD for him to meet with families, and that was a really successful, and they were very grateful for that. I think just being responsive, having an ear, and maybe even just taking the time of like, oh, I don't know much about that at the moment, but let me see what I can get my hands on. And just trying to putting your hands up. We didn't have a lot of access to psychologists or those kind of things in our community, so we had to go and kind of seek. So back in 17, after the fire, the St Ivan fire had really devastated a part of our community, I was really kind of concerned that we might respond to children and families in a detrimental way, and I didn't want to make it any more traumatic. I was really concerned about that. So we contacted Centacare, who we work with on and off. They give us lots of social emotional advice for children and families, and they provided us with a psychologist that came over, and he was able to meet with a couple of families who'd been, their children had been experiencing some separation distress, and then he met with us for 2 hours and gave us some really amazing advice on how we could work, very simple and concise advice about how we can work with our families and our children. We found that really helpful. I think also doing it as a team too, so we're all on the same page. We knew exactly how we were going to deal with the situation. I thought that was really helpful for us.
Can you summarise what it was that made the difference about him coming in and talking to you, aside from the team cohesion? Were there other things that...
I think it gave us a common knowledge and a common approach. It also gave us time he explained what trauma was like and what it was about, and I think it was the first time we'd heard about that kind of learning, and I think it gave us a time to come together as a team and to think about what our approaches, what our practice was going to be like in the face of a child, say, bringing up a traumatic experience or a traumatic memory, or a parent coming in highly aroused, how we deal with that kind of situation. It was fabulous.
I think it also made it an important thing too. It wasn't that, well, we've seen fires before and you should just get on with it and deal with it and etc. But he helped the educators understand that no, it's okay. It is a very traumatic experience. It's okay to feel this way. It's okay for the children to be like this. It's okay for the parents to be like this. You might experience all these different things, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's good to continue to talk about it and forever, you know.
So parents, of course, have a really huge role in helping with their children at home, and they'll do that in lots of different ways. I mean, of course, the first thing is the parent needs to understand that they're very likely impacted themselves, and the first thing they need to attend to is themselves. So they need to restore some sense of calm so they can then be a calm presence for their child. Often in the middle of these moments when there's been some sort of natural disaster, adults can be so caught up in trying to deal with all the different threats that they forget about their children. Because they're trying to deal with everything else. And really these are the moments when we need to be most present. So we need to increase the amount of time that we spend with a child, not to ask them lots of questions, not to keep badgering them about whether they're okay or not, but just to play with them, to enjoy some time with them, to try and recreate a sense of safety and security through play and fun and doing the everyday things that families do. So, one of the things that can happen with disasters is the usual routines can be lost, because sometimes the house has been lost, but sometimes it may be less dramatic. And children really thrive when there's a routine. And so we need to try and reintroduce some new routines to daily life so the child has got a sense of how a day starts, then what happens, and then how the day ends. And there's predictability to it, because that predictability really has a huge impact in terms of restoring that sense of safety and security.